We're going to have a short video, well, I hope it's short, by the Director General, Matthias Cormann, of the OECD. So when it's ready, we're going to start with that, and then straight after that, we'll have our fireside chat. Our panelists are already here, ready to engage and have conversations, but before that, we have a short video by the Director General of the OECD. Thanks, Courtney.
Dear Jens, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends all, thank you for inviting me to share a few observations at this World Climate Foundation Investment COP event. Mobilizing increased investment is indeed at the core of achieving our climate objectives. From electrifying our transport infrastructure and expanding renewable energy generation to enabling the development of new low emissions technologies, to building the skills needed for the adoption of all of these technologies. Estimates suggest that implementing current nationally determined contribution targets will require $400 billion US per year through to 2030. And achieving adaptation goals in countries' nationally determined contributions and national action plans would require a combined total of $387 billion per year until 2030, including $215 billion US for developing countries. The good news is that countries have made some progress in meeting their investment needs so far, though much more progress will need to be made. In 2022, developed countries collectively provided and mobilized $115.9 billion US in climate finance for developing countries, surpassing by more than 15% their commitment of $100 billion US by 2020. This was a significant and symbolic milestone. And the challenge now, of course, is to sustain and maintain this momentum through 2025 and for the new post-2025 climate finance goal. The OECD is helping governments meet this challenge through robust data analysis and practical guidance, firstly by enhancing global transparency and coordination on climate-aligned finance tracking. Last year at COP29, countries committed to a new collective quantified goal of $300 billion US per year by 2035. And $1.3 trillion US in international climate finance over the same time frame. Towards this, the OECD IEA Climate Exchange Group is providing technical analysis to clarify the scope of this objective, identify credible tracking methodologies, and strengthen transparency frameworks essential for effective implementation and progress monitoring. This includes defining what counts as climate finance, how to avoid double counting, and how to measure mobilization of private finance. Second, by supporting investor confidence in and information on green investment opportunities. According to the OECD's 2025 Global Corporate Sustainability Report, 91% of listed companies by global market capitalization disclosed sustainability-related information in 2024, up from 86% in 2022. Yet companies of varying sizes across different regions and sectors use diverse standards for the disclosure of sustainability-related information, making it more difficult for investors to compare sustainability performance when these standards are not sufficiently well aligned. The OECD helps policymakers identify opportunities to improve the level of alignment and to ensure high-quality sustainability disclosures, drawing on our G20 OECD principles of corporate governance, which were updated in 2023 to reflect developments in corporate sustainability practices. Third, by supporting the mobilization of private capital for sustainable investments through innovative financial instruments. New OECD analysis based on a survey of financial institutions and other businesses identifies credit risk as the main barrier to private clean energy investments in emerging markets and developing economies. Blended finance tools, such as credit guarantees to improve the risk-return profile, can play a transformative role in addressing these barriers. Yet product complexity, regulatory burdens, and limited project pipelines continue to constrain their potential. The OECD's recently updated Development Assistance Committee blended finance guidelines provide guidance on addressing these issues and scaling up blended finance through improved project design and selection. Looking ahead, stronger policy coordination and mutual understanding is essential to create the right enabling conditions for green investment. The OECD's Inclusive Forum on Carbon Mitigation Approaches, the IFCMA, is helping to optimize the global impact of emissions reduction efforts around the world through better data and information sharing, evidence-based mutual learning, and inclusive multilateral dialogue. This December, the IFCMA will launch its climate policy database, allowing policymakers to compare coverage of and interactions between mitigation measures across countries and sectors, which is a major step forward towards better understanding the full range of measures being taken around the world and optimizing their collective impact. Preliminary findings indicate that taxes remain the most prevalent mitigation instrument across sectors, except when it comes to buildings, where performance standards dominate, with policies most often targeting buildings, transport and energy, and comparatively fewer measures addressing waste, agriculture, forestry and fishing. In conclusion, the OECD looks forward to continuing to work with our members and partners as a trusted platform for dialogue, evidence and cooperation, and to help unlock the investment flows needed to reach our climate objectives and to foster stronger, sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Thank you very much.
Can we give him a hand of applause? As much as he's not here, he can feel it in spirit all the way from Belém in Brazil. Great. So now on to our next panel. Well, it's more of a fireside chat. Infrastructure that protects, investing in resilience. And I'd like to call upon our next speakers, Federico Grosso. I hope I said it well. And he is from ServiceNow, one of our great partners at the World Climate Foundation. And then we also have Paola Ridolfi from the World Bank Group. Welcome. Let's give them a warm hand of applause. Sure.
Thank you very much for being here, and I'm very pleased to be here with Federico, and really fitting to have heard the words of Matthias Cormann, the Executive Director of the OECD, about how building resilient infrastructure is really the key to a successful transition that takes into consideration the impact of climate change and helps cities and countries adapt. More importantly, we have to look at infrastructure as something that we need to think in a completely different ways. At the World Bank, we invest heavily in infrastructure, and we have started to help countries consider to include climate considerations and risks in the way they plan and build infrastructure. And what we know is that we need to do it because over 1 billion people are at risk of facing at least one climate disaster in their lifetime, and every year we have 400 climate disasters that cost over $200 billion globally. What is important is investing, right? So let me ask Federico what it means to build cities and services that actually take these considerations into account. Because we need to consider that it's really about investing for each dollar that we invest more in an infrastructure, we're going to recover 4 more over a period of 25 years. If 3% cost is added to building a road or building an electricity plant, we know that over time we're going to have a gain of 3 times or 4 times more from the recovery of the net losses that we would have otherwise had from an infrastructure that is so vulnerable to climate. So let me turn to Federico and ask him, what do you do in terms of helping cities at ServiceNow and helping citizens on a day-to-day basis address the risks of climate change that we all see on a daily basis in our lives? Thank you, Federico. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paola. Interesting fact, you do have 2 Italians on stage today. We do live in different parts of the world. It's Washington for Paola, it's São Paulo for me. I represent a technology company, a software company that is specializing in making technology works for people, the centerpiece of which is making workflows work. And when it comes to climate resilience, if there is one thing that I would love for you to take away from at least my part of the panel is that technology is the new infrastructure of resilience. And I say that for a number of reasons. First of all, because obviously in the last 18 to 24 months, we have seen how artificial intelligence has entered into the fabric of our society. And we have experienced firsthand how artificial intelligence can be a great ally, a great technological ally to climate change and to readiness and to resilience. In many ways, obviously there is an aspect that is directly to us as consumers, but more importantly, there is an aspect that is how large organizations can operate at scale and use technology as a strong ally. We do have many examples. I'm going to make reference to one during this first answer, which is the city of Melbourne. And the city of Melbourne, the way they actually monitor the changes, for example, in water, and the quality of the water, they are able to predict 48 hours in advance what is going to be the quality of the water. That means that you do have massive savings, sometimes in a 30% or more in the way water is deployed, used, and is looked after. And I think that is one of the examples where you see how technology becomes your ally. There are obviously an incredible amount of data to be processed. The challenge for human beings is always how quickly I can process that data and how can I make that data work for us. And you get into the concept of what we define as autonomous machines or autonomous IT, for example, where basically a system that you build becomes a system that can monitor itself and act, a system that can heal itself. And that is the beauty of applying these technologies at scale. I think that when it comes to artificial intelligence, it cannot just be considered as a standalone technology, but I think more as the epicenter, the center of gravity for a variety of other technologies that come with it. So whether it is data from sensor and IoTs and smart devices, whether it is satellite images and the ability to process that at scale, we are entering a new area of resilience that actually doesn't only help you to anticipate and respond to a climate disaster, but in some cases works to prevent such disaster to happen, or, as Paola was saying, helping everyday's life in our cities to be better. As a citizen of Brazil and a citizen of São Paulo, when you see 11 million people moving at scale every day, you start understanding what the problem of smart cities are and where the solutions are. And sometimes there are sophisticated solutions to very simple problems that make an incredible impact. So I hope Paola will give you an overview of that.
Thank you very much. And this is very nice to know that all this is now at hand. This is all available to citizens, cities around the world. This requires financing, as we were saying at the beginning. So what we want to look at also is what are the financing schemes and the innovations that companies and public sector financiers can bring. At the World Bank, through the private sector arm, we have the International Financing Corporation and the guarantee arm, MIGA. We bring a lot of innovative de-risking investments models that help cities issue bonds to raise funds for these innovations, as well as finance private sector by rewarding their climate commitments and their innovation that they bring. And I think one aspect of this interconnection between financing infrastructure, innovation, and development that takes into account climate is really the early warning systems. So, for example, in India, the World Bank has financed heat maps for for cities that take into account climate projections. So for extreme heat, we help cities prepare plans that prevent the way citizens are left unarmed in the face of extreme heat by preparing plans that have, for example, refuges for shelters for citizens, or adjust the times of the public transportation based on the weather and the extreme heat projections, and therefore reduce the health impact and also prepare better health facilities to face the new consequences of extreme heat, which find in particular women to be more vulnerable. We also look at cities as a way, and countries as sort of having to face new types of economies with new types of jobs that are created, and more jobs that are created thanks to green transitions and the use of technology, while also other aspects of city planning and previously used sort of employment opportunities are no longer available. Can you tell us a little bit how you see the jobs, employment areas in cities, in particular, as linked to these opportunities to apply technology in the face of climate? What opportunities can we see for cities to create new and more up-to-date jobs for citizens, while also providing services that take technology into account to face the impact of climate?
Fantastic.
Thank you. And ServiceNow, I know, is at the forefront of really changing the way your business model is adapting. So
Yes.
thank you, Federico.
Yes. Thank you, Paola. So I would say any climate problem is way too big to tackle just by one constituency. So it's not just the government, it's not just the private sector. We see a lot of collaboration between the two, and we believe that the answer is within this collaboration. When it comes to making cities stronger and smarter, for us, obviously, it starts with data and the ability to capture the data, to have the data transcend the silos in which it used to be stored, and be represented in real time. It's a very important aspect of what we do. I was with the city of São Paulo just a couple of days ago, and looking at their command center is basically, you do have 2 or 3 wall-to-wall screens full of all the data that is relevant, not only for the climate aspect of the city, but for example, for the traffic of the city, how things are moving, what's happening, how the weather is going to impact that. And when you look at some of the largest Latin American cities, which operate at the scale of millions of people moving every day, that is fundamental. I think that there is a new way to thinking how you use in real time the data and how you visualize it and you create this command center for readiness. That's one aspect. And then there is also the aspect of how you make the city smarter, not only in dramatic times like the ones that we had described, but how the day-to-day life of citizens changes. And I'll give you an example that is very simple, is a real-time example. And it's something that we have been doing with the city of São Paulo. Imagine João de Souza, which is the Brazilian equivalent of John Smith, and John Smith decides to sell his cars. Okay? Normally, that process of selling a car would take about a week. And that week is a week where our friend João needs to get in his car, go to a number of different places to actually operate the transfer of a car, okay? Seems simple, but the reality is that week is a very expensive week. It's a very expensive week for João, and it's a very expensive week for the city. And by the way, that week can be longer, because if João happens to be arriving at the office where the DMV equivalent in Brazil and not having the right document, he needs to come back. Go back home, redo the documents, and so on and so forth. This is means that Joao is on the street, comes back and forward. It might take time off from work, and for some people, taking a day off of work is something that impacts materially the day-to-day life of his family. Now, thanks to the partnership that we do have with the city of São Paulo, that complex 1 week of going around chasing documents to transfer the ownership of a car happens in 4 minutes. And it happens truly digitally, and it happens all on an app, which is the government's of São Paulo app that we have built with them. It seems like a small example. When you start, and Paola and I were talking about it earlier, when you start to think about that example and you multiply for the millions of Joaos de Souza that are on the streets every day, that means a lot of change at scale, and certainly the proximity to a much smarter city. That happens thanks to what? To data. To data at scale, to workflows, and to obviously the ability that artificial intelligence allows you to orchestrate behind the scenes all of the process that normally would be a heavy, bureaucratic, manual process.
Thank you very much, Federico. And I think we need to really bring it back to sort of, from the Joao level to the city level and the country level, how everything sort of trickles down and trickles up. And so we see these services as being prioritized by cities as a way to merge the financing and the data for the sake of providing services. That requires cities that have resilient planning as part of their prioritization. And it requires countries that allocate resources to prioritize to take climate impact into account while also reducing their carbon footprint. And when they do that, countries have to take into consideration also the expenses and the subsidies that are currently going in the wrong direction, right? So if we look globally, we have $1.2 trillion that goes into subsidies that go in the opposite direction of the services that you're describing, that create actually more need to use private cars, more bureaucracy, more fossil fuel subsidies, more agriculture fertilizer subsidies that create an environment where Joao is going to get more sick and take more time to go to work and to take care of all the bureaucratic processes that he needs to take care of. So we have a situation here where as cities grow more resilient, they can also put pressure on governments to actually use resources in a way that can be allocated in a more progressive and more pro-transition way that makes Joao's life easier. So with this, I would like to go back to what the executive director of the OECD was reminding us, which is the power of partnership. He referred to the multilateral development banks launching a year ago a commitment to finance $120 billion a year together in climate funds. Of these, over 40 billion will go to adaptation. So we see these as resources that countries can use to actually make Joao's life easier, and that countries can use to also mobilize private sector on the markets by using innovative financing schemes that help finance infrastructure that takes a climate impact into account. So we're really happy to see this connection between the OECD level, the multilateral development banks, the UN commitments that are being discussed at this time. We have a new climate goal that was agreed in Baku last year for 300 billion a year. We have a new roadmap towards 1.3 trillion that are funds that are not going to be created from scratch. These are funds that need to be leveraged from the private sector, and these are funds that the public sector at government level needs to redirect from harmful subsidies towards progressive expenses that make citizens' lives easier, that connect data and projections for climate impact and make the best use of these data to the service of citizens. So really grateful for the opportunity. Joao, any closing hints or examples that you want to share with us? And then let's see if there are any questions from the public. And I see that the next session is already about to start.
Fantastic. No, I would say, just to repeat, very important for us, the message, technology is the infrastructure of resilience of the future. I think definitely there is an operating word there, which is trust. How do we foster trust in the institutions we work with? How do we foster trust within the communities? How do we foster trust towards technology? That sometimes is something tricky to discuss, sometimes creates some resistance. How do we embrace technology in a way that is responsible, ethical, and can benefit us at scale? You know, I think that the future is not predefined. Our future is something that we are going to create together. Technology per se is a tool that needs to be directed and shaped. In reality is technology has always been an advancer of society. People have, in the long term, use it at its favor. That's what human beings tend to do with new technologies. And so we do have an opportunity within this generation of using a new transformative emerging technology like artificial intelligence and put it at work for good. And certainly for the company that I represent and represent here with my colleagues, that's the intention that we do have.
Thank you very much. Let me see if there are any questions from the floor before we move on to the next session. If not, I would like to thank the organizers. Very happy to be here at the World Climate Foundation Forum as every year. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your COP experience here and the World Climate Forum. Thank you.
Obrigado,
Thank
Paola.
you.
Obrigado.
They're wrapping up.